Hi, and welcome to this episode of IT Candor. I hate, and I mean hate, jump servers. They are security controlled from more than 2 decades ago. The issue of a jump server is that it puts people into a false sense of security. This leads to them being complacent and not improving security in other areas that will provide real security value, and not this false sense approach. Here are some reasons why it's a false sense of security in no particular order. Overprivileging of access to the jump server itself, unnecessary software installed, mixing different tiers of credentials on the jump server itself, and more importantly, skipping the clean source keyboard principle altogether. And these are just a few that come to mind, but let's explore these more in detail. One of the biggest mistakes is granting everyone who has access to the jump server local administrator permissions. The elevated permissions or access required is supposed to be on the last endpoint, not the jump server. Simple example, let's say you need to access a web server. That account that is used to first RDP into the jump server is granted local admin rights on the jump server. That account doesn't need any elevated permission on the jump server. It only requires permission on the web server that is being jumped to from the jump server. This scenario fails least privilege access principle by granting the account privileges on the jump server itself. What happens next is unnecessary software being installed on the jump server. Just like too many cooks in the kitchen phrase, too many admins on a server is a problem. There'll be 3 different zip programs like WinRare, WinZip, 7-Zip installed because each admin has a tool that they like. Someone decides Adobe Reader is needed. Another thinks Firefox and Chrome are needed, even though no one should be browsing the internet from any server ever. A jump server should be 100% throwaway. Jump servers catch on fire, who cares? It's throw away and replace with a new one. That should be 0 data loss when replacing a jump server. Up next is mixing tier credentials. This one will take a bit more to explain, but the first thing to understand is that not all accounts are equal. Let's take a super simple example. We have an account that is a member of domain admins, the most powerful permissions within Active Directory, versus an account that has been delegated permission to a local admin on a single member server. The Active Directory tier model is a 3-tiered model based on the BIBA integrity model. The highest permission is called Tier 0. This would be domain admins. The next tier is Tier 1, which is granted access to endpoints that do not require domain admin permissions. The final tier, Tier 2, are user endpoints which pose the highest security risk. Let's use another scenario to explain. There's a user called Dwayne Camacho, who is a member of domain admins, and then there is Joe Bowers, who's an average server admin. Using their accounts, they both RDP into the same jump server. Now that jump server has mixed credentials from both Tier 0 and Tier 1 on the same endpoint. This is how pass the hash attacks and pass the token attacks are possible with sharing credentials on the same endpoint. Finally, and probably the biggest offense of all, is straight up ignoring the clean keyboard principle. So what is a clean keyboard principle, you ask? Well, how about we take a journey first, and by the end you'll answer the question yourself and be able to explain it to others. Let's say you're at a coffee shop and there is a laptop sitting there with no one else around. Would you log into your bank account from that computer? Most people would answer, hell no. And the reason would be, I don't know whose computer that is, and if it's even trustworthy. Thus, I'm not risking someone getting access to my bank accounts. Now apply the same thinking to any computer in your office. If you have an account with tiered elevated access, before you type those credentials on a keyboard, it must be clean. This means you trust this computer to not be compromised, to not steal your credentials. So the concept of a clean keyboard is also known as a PAW, Privileged Access Workstation. Let's have a candor moment. I run into these scenarios so often that it is very frustrating. And this is why I have this YouTube channel, to vent and hopefully spread the word that jump servers suck, okay? If you solve a problem by using a jump server, you've created 2 problems. Good frickin' job, okay? That's not a mitigation. A security risk is to not have the risk to begin with. And even ChatGPT and AI that is less than 1 year old already calls jump servers obsolete. These devices need to be separated to the highest degree possible from the rest of the network, and only a jump server to get into the environment to manage the system is an option to reduce the firewall inbound and outbound IPs and ports. But this jump server should be limited to only a few people who need to access the environment externally. I'd advise 99% of the time the management should be within the environment itself to keep it isolated or air-gapped. Oh, and don't forget, you still need a clean keyboard or a PAW before accessing that jump server. This means clean keyboard to jump server to device inside the isolated environment would be the process. I hope others join me in the jump servers straight up suck bandwagon and start to educate others that a jump server doesn't solve a problem, it only creates more security risk. That's it for this episode, and as always, be candor.